Okay, so 50 years ago, when I first encountered Buddhism as a teenager, I bought my first Buddhist book, and I've actually got it here. Here it is, 50 years old. It's not a very inspiring looking cover or anything, but it is a 50-year-old book, and it was a wonderful first book to get as a student, an eager student of Buddhism, because it's quite a special book. It gives you a real insight into what life was really like for the disciples of the Buddha being around the Buddha. And it's called, good, thank you, Footprints of Gautama the Buddha. So Gautama was the Buddha's name before he became the Buddha. It's called Siddhartha Gautama. So Footprints of Gautama the Buddha. I really recommend it. You can still get it. You can buy it on Amazon. It's still there. Even though it was first published in 1957. You can still get it. What's special about it? Marie Biles, an Australian lady. And what's great about it is it's written as if it's an autobiography of one of the disciples, a disciple called Yasa. And there he is, living, practicing with the Buddha, with all the thousands of disciples. And he's just telling you what it was really like to be there. It's all based on the scriptures, so we know these things happened. But you get right into it. You're really there with the Buddha. So it's a wonderful work of imagination. So quite a wonderful book, really. That one, Footprints of the Buddha. I was also really attracted to the title. The idea of footprints. Because we know the Buddha was a human being. So he had a body, he walked, so he would have left footprints through when he was walking through the jungle, when he was walking along the riverbank, a muddy riverbank, he'd leave footprints. If he was walking along through the desert, he'd leave footprints. So it's quite an interesting image, footprints. So, yeah, I've got a little image here of it. So there's the Buddha, just walking along the sand, leaving his footprints. So it's a really nice image. It's quite a rich image. It's a symbol, you could say, of something. Quite a rich symbol, I'd say. And I think it's a metaphor of the legacy of the Buddha. The Buddha left this legacy, just like he left footprints. He left the legacy of his teaching and his example. And today we call that legacy Buddhism or the Dharma. So that got hold of me as a young teenager, that image. The interesting thing happened quite shortly after that, in that I came across another book, a great classic of Buddhist literature called the Dhammapada. And of course, that is the subject of the series that we're engaged in the moment on Dharma Night, is this great spiritual classic, the Dhammapada. And so I dived into the Dhammapada as a young, I think I was about 15 by that time, dived into it. And I came across this reference to the Buddha as the trackless one. The trackless one. So on one hand, we had footprints of the Buddha, and already connected with that. That's great, footprints of the Buddha. But then I'm getting the trackless one. So how do those two things go? And that was a real problem for me. That was actually a bit of a problem for quite a few years. What was really annoying was that the Buddhists that I was around at the time couldn't sort of really explain that to me very well, and what was really going on. If I'd come here, of course, that would have been cleared up very quickly. Plug. Yeah, so I did resolve it. I realized over time that both are true. It's not a conundrum. Both of them are true. I was taking the trackless one, the idea of the trackless one, too literally. Yeah, which is a real bugbear of Buddhism, is we take things too literally all the time. Of course, it's a metaphor. It's a metaphor, the Buddha. But I think it's worth really explaining that and going into. So that's what I'm going to do tonight, is to go into that. So what I'll do is I'll read you out these verses in the Dhammapada that's in chapter 14, the Dhammapada, called the Enlightened One. It's the first two verses, and this is where this reference to the trackless one comes. So see if you can hear it. Here we go. That enlightened one, whose sphere is endless, whose victory is irreversible, and after whose victory no defilements remain to be conquered. By what track will you lead him astray, the trackless one? That enlightened one in whom there is not that ensnaring, entangling craving to lead anywhere in conditioned existence, and whose sphere is endless. By what track will you lead him astray, the trackless one? So there it is, the trackless one. So that's the first time I ever encountered that metaphor of the trackless one. So what does it all mean? What do you think is meant by the trackless one? Well, that's what I wish to kind of explore now. How is the Buddha trackless? And what does that mean for our lives? How can we be trackless? Well, I think there's so much to explore just in those two verses that I read out. I'm just going to focus on this bit of the trackless one. And to answer that, I simply really need to refer to what we call the Buddha's victory. The Buddha's victory. The Buddha gained enlightenment, he achieved nirvana, and we call that the Buddha's victory. And specifically, his victory over greed or craving, hatred, and delusion, what's often called the three unwholesome roots of conditioned existence. So yeah, there's this reference to the endless sphere, and this is the sphere of enlightenment. So the Buddha gained enlightenment, nirvana. Let's catch up with him. Here he is in the jungle. He's gained enlightenment. There he is. So he's experiencing nirvana. Yeah, wearing his robes, his probably quite ragged robes. And, well, we've got this word, haven't we? We use enlightenment. There's lots of other words like nirvana that you might have heard of. But we can't really understand what that is because we need to experience it ourselves. So all we've really got is a rational explanation for what enlightenment is, a kind of an explanation that's been given usually by the Buddha for what that really is. And the Buddha gave a number of explanations about enlightenment, how to understand it. And one of them was freedom. Freedom. And there's two ways you can look at freedom. One of them is freedom to. So freedom to do things which you can't do otherwise. And there's also freedom from things that are holding you back, keeping you in some kind of bondage. And this is the one, the freedom from, that the Buddha is really referring to. And he's talking about something called greed, hatred, and delusion. And the Buddha became the trackless one because he overcame greed, hatred, and delusion. We might think, oh yeah, well, that's straightforward, isn't it? Overcoming greed, hatred, and delusion, that's not difficult. Well, it is actually. I'm going to say a little bit about it, but before I do that, I'll just show you something, another little drawing I've done. And yeah. So yeah, this is called the Wheel of Life, and it's a depiction of what we call the samsara, which is the world that we human beings, animals, we all live in. There's all sorts of mental states and stuff going on there. It's a difficult place, actually, the samsara that we live in. And the thing that keeps it turning right, the hub, has got three animals here and all biting each other's tail. There's a cockerel, male chicken, there's a snake, and there's a pig. And they represent greed, hatred, and delusion. So the greed bit is the cockerel. hate is the snake, the pig is ignorance. It's not necessarily that those animals actually really exhibit that, but they're just little symbols, if you like, of that. So tonight I'm just going to talk about craving. I'm going to talk about the other two because that's enough. Overcoming craving for the Buddha to become the trackless one. So yes, he was born a human being, if you remember, and by his own efforts he overcame the problems of existence, old age, sickness, death, all those kinds of things. He grappled with that, spent years and years in the jungle, meditating and practicing, and eventually broke through and became enlightened. So when that happened, he left the samsara realm and he moved into the nirvana realm, or the nirvanic realm. But these two realms sort of overlap each other in a way. And so there he was with his disciples in that realm, but he himself was not experiencing the world in the same way that they were. He crossed over. I've got a little poetic, traditional Buddhist poetic metaphor here. So are you ready for it? Here we go. They crossed over the sea of samsara to the further shore of nirvana. The raft they sailed on was the Dharma. Yeah, so he crossed over to the further shore of nirvana. And many of his women and men disciples also did that as well. Thousands and thousands and thousands of people have done that in the last 2,500 years. They've crossed over to the shore of nirvana. And in the next series we're doing, as Arthur City mentioned, we're going to be looking at some of those women and men who crossed over in that kind of way. All quite different people. So this verse in the Dhammapada is saying, well, by what track can we lead the Buddha astray? And the fact is, we can't lead the Buddha astray. Not at all. He's not for turning. That's not going to happen to him. He won't be distracted by anything in the human world, in the samsaric world. Yeah, so what am I talking about here? What I'm talking about is a word, ancient Sanskrit word we call trishna, which simply means craving or thirst. Yeah. So I'm going to go into this a bit and what it is. The Buddha's obviously beyond craving, and he doesn't experience it in any way at all. Nothing. Absolutely no craving in his life at all. That desire to sort of reach out, grab something and bring it towards you. That's what we're doing all the time. Every time we look at our mobile phone, we're grabbing, say, oh, look, there's a news item. Oh, look, there's something I could buy. And we're doing it all the time, without even really thinking about it. It doesn't mean that he didn't need food and want sleep and communication and friendship and all those kind of healthy things. Of course he did. He had that going on. But there was no emotional or existential drive to acquire, to grab and pull in. So there's no desire for food, sex, status, money, possessions. Craving includes all those things, of course, but it also means something a lot deeper than that. It means something more existential. So by completely letting go of craving, he's become trackless. He doesn't leave a karmic trail of carnage, which is what a lot of us human beings do. If you look at the state of the planet, that's all brought about by human beings. He's coursing in the world in a different way from what we are. His actions are not based on greed, hatred, and delusion. And we can only follow him out of his compassion because he's shown us the path that we can follow. Otherwise, we wouldn't know. We'd just be stuck revolving around the wheel of life. And when we do that, we leave tracks. We leave tracks that other people can see. So what do we mean by Trishna? What do we mean by craving? What exactly is it? Let's have a look. So the Buddha actually enumerated 3 kinds of craving. The first was called karma Trishna. So that is literally sensual experience, any kind of sensual experience. It's karma Trishna. And then we've got bhava Trishna, sorry, craving for a fixed identity or fixed kind of existence. And then we've got vibhava, let's get this right, vibhava Trishna, not Krishna, Trishna, craving for non-existence. You know, that denial of being alive, and also not wanting to suffer is included in this vibhava Trishna. We don't want to suffer. We don't like it. So the Buddha completely lets go of all these 3 kinds of craving in these 3 ways. And it's pretty hard for us to imagine, isn't it? But when we think about it, it does use your imagination. It does have the taste of freedom about it. You think a lot of the time we're just slaves to our desires, all the things that we want. And when we get them, we hope that we'll be satisfied and fulfilled and happy. And but letting go of a lot of that process must be a bit of a relief. I've had a little bit of a kind of slight echo of this when I gave up working and retired. And I enjoyed my working life, 43 years. I was out there early in the morning working full time, 43 years. And I didn't really look forward to retiring until about 6 months before I did. And suddenly I thought, oh God, I'm sick of this, going out every morning. I just want space. I want to have a life where I don't have to sort of prove anything and earn money. And, you know, I've done it all. And lucky enough, I was able to do that. So I remember walking out of that hospital ward on my very last shift. Oh, it was wonderful. The relief. And I sometimes think, well, multiply that by a few sort of centrillions, and that might be a little bit what enlightenment is like, or not having any craving. Because the fact is, we're very attached to sense pleasure. Food, sex, shopping, comfort, music, sport, perfumes, box sets, alcohol. We've got all this stuff kind of going on, haven't we? And some of that is pretty healthy human stuff. It's fine. But some of it isn't. Some of it's really neurotic. And we're too caught up in it, really. Buddhism as a religion isn't prudish, and it isn't killjoy. It's got a healthy respect for sensual pleasure. But it does recommend restraint and being sensible about your sense pleasures. Because there's this problem, there's always a problem with sense pleasure. No matter how refined it is, we get addicted, don't we? We get addicted to that thing, whatever it is. And what happens is, in my case, it's cafe lattes, actually. I think I've had issues with cafe lattes, and I've had to deal with that. Because the thing is, when you're addicted, you're not free. You're kind of in some kind of imprisonment or bondage because you need to have your fix. It's okay if you're getting your fix on a regular basis, but then what if your fix is kind of interrupted in some way? You know, you really suffer. You really suffer. There's an image for it in Buddhism called honey on a razor's edge. So imagine, you know, if you're going to taste the honey, but it's smeared all over the edge of the razor, then, you know, it's a bit of a dangerous situation, isn't it? Well, that's the situation that we're in with craving, with sense craving particularly. That said, I think Buddhists are pretty healthy around this kind of stuff. But you've always got to keep your eye on it and watch out and review it from time to time. Retreats are a good time to do that. I think if it was just sense craving that we had to deal with, I think life would be a lot easier, because I think we would just, well, we'd enjoy it and we'd move on, we'd deal with it. But it isn't actually. There's a lot more to Trishna than sense craving. It doesn't just mean sense experience. The fact is that we go to things, we go to people, we go to situations, we go to our life to find permanence and security. We're always looking for permanence and security at a deep level. We want what we have to last forever. We don't want it to go away. We don't want it to change. We want it to just keep coming. Or we go towards something with a fixed idea of what it's going to give us and what we'll gain from that or from them. And it's much easier to see this in other people than it is to see it in yourself. You know, so it's very, very easy to see, he's had 4 cafe lattes today. Look at this. What's going on here? But the fact is, you know, last Wednesday I had 4 cafe lattes in a day and 2 pieces of cake. I didn't need any of it, you know, I didn't need any of it. And so, yeah, you know, as I say, I've had issues, and you need to keep on top of it. You need to keep on top of this sort of stuff. Like I say, it's much easier to see it in other people than it is in yourself. Somehow we've got a kind of a blind spot in ourselves. We can't see how it happens. So much pain and frustration is caused by our craving for permanent being, yeah, for things to be eternally present. Sometimes it's so painful because we don't get what we want, or we get it and it's not very good. After all, we can end up craving for non-existence. And we look for non-existence in drugs, narcotics, alcohol, overworking, or even, unfortunately, in some cases, your own death. Whatever it is, you're looking for some kind of oblivion. You're looking for oblivion. And it's very, very sad. Now, all of this craving for fixed, bounded existence is very, very deep in us. It's hardwired. So we shouldn't give ourselves a really hard time. We need to be realistic about this. Isn't the work of a weekend sorting this out. It's very, very deep in us. I've got 2 granddaughters, and I've just noticed as they get a little bit older, they're just how early in the piece in their lives they want things, and how manipulative my older granddaughter is to get what she wants. You know, she's learned how to do that quite quickly. So it runs very, very deep. We don't see things as they really are. We don't see people as they really are. We don't see ourselves as we really are. And if we could really see things as they really are, the craving would stop. Yeah, the craving would stop. I'm going to go into that in a little bit more detail. But this gives you a little bit of an idea of how the Buddha has become the trackless one. He's just let go of that whole process. He's seen through it. So if the Buddha doesn't have this craving for fixed existence, then what's his vision? What's his insight? What is he going towards? What's he looking at? I've got another little image here. It is walking through the forest. Trackless. So don't forget, it's not a literal thing, the trackless one. It probably would be making tracks, but there he is. He's moving through his life. Enlightened people move through their lives. But what's the vision for life? And the answer to that is this very, very clunky Buddhist word that we use called conditioned co-production. Sometimes shortened to conditionality. And the Pali word is paticca. And so what's that all about? Well, in some of the early scriptures, it's been reduced to a simple formula. It sounds a little bit like a medical or a scientific formula, but apparently some people on hearing this formula in the scriptures gained spiritual insight just hearing the formula. So, you never know. I'll read it out, something might happen. I'll put on my best Buddha voice now, and let's see what happens. This being that becomes, from the arising of this, that arises. This not being, that does not become. From the cessation of this, that ceases. Okay. So you might think, well, what on earth is that all about? It sounds formulaic, doesn't it? But it actually encapsulates the whole of the Buddha's vision, the whole of life as he saw it. And the essence of this formula is, the essence of this vision is that nothing anywhere is fixed, permanent, and unchanging. So in other words, everything, everywhere is changing all the time. And there's nothing you can do about that. Whether it's a solar system, it's an empire, it's an individual person, it's an object of any kind of phenomenon that you can think of, it's all subject to ceasing, arising and ceasing, arising and ceasing. There's just this continual arising and ceasing all the time. So there's a rising of conditions, which lead to a further flow of conditions, which will lead to another flow of conditions. So just think of all the conditions that have to come together just to produce this little shrine here. The wood, the people, the carpenters, Buddhism has to be invented, so there's a Buddha, candles. I mean, it's endless. It's endless, the conditions that have to arise just to, and when it comes to a human being, think of the conditions that have to be put into place for a human being to arise. Yeah. And at the same time, we've got ceasing going on. Things are passing away, dying, changing into something else. Yeah, all the time. So there's an emergence and there's a passing. Zillions and zillions of ways and examples of that. So it's happening everywhere in the universe. So I was thinking recently about this building and looking at some pictures of what it looked like 100 years ago, 150 years ago. And I'll bet the people that were using this theatre and everything, they had no idea that it would ever be a Buddhist centre and that people would be meditating, and they just had no idea about that. But think about what it might be in 100 years from time, 100 years from now. It could be a training centre for androids. And they've got no idea that it ever used to be a Buddhist centre. It could be something completely different that we can't even think of. But that will happen gradually. But something will happen. So the problem with craving is we're attempting to make secure, fix something which is always changing. And craving for not being is also futile as well, because experience, life, just can't go away. You can't just make something into nothing. You can't make something nothing. Just blot it out. You can't, it's impossible, you can't do it, because there's always an arising. An arising will always be there. So yeah, I left my job. I no longer work in a hospital, but something else has arisen in its place in my life. So the Buddha saw this. He was deeply in touch with this deep truth. And he saw that this was the experience for men and women everywhere. He was very, very harmonized with this teaching. Also, the Buddha was very, very happy in this vision. So in the Dhammapada, it says, Nibbang Paranang Sukhang, which simply means nirvana is the supreme bliss. Nirvana is very, very blissful, but not in a way that we can imagine. In our ego-based kind of pleasure, The Buddha's way, way beyond that kind of subjective pleasure. It's a different kind of pleasure. I was thinking recently about, I was trying to find an example of where I actually enjoy something and there's no ego or craving ego. The only thing I could come up with was November the 5th and fireworks. You know, when the fireworks, you just stood there and they're all going off. I don't want anything. I just want to look at it and enjoy it. It's just there. But then I thought, oh no, I do want them to carry on, you know, not stop. So there's always craving, isn't there? It's always there. So there he is in the forest in his rag robes, consumed by great ecstasy. He's liberated from all bonds, all craving, all ignorance, all hatred. They've all gone. And fear, jealousy, conceit, all those negative emotions, they've all gone. So there's a little verse in the Dhammapada, another little verse, as I get towards the end here. And it says, whoever in the world overcomes this wretched, adhesive craving, so difficult to overcome, his sorrows fall from him like drops of water from a lotus leaf. It's a lovely image, isn't it? Water just dropping off the lotus leaf and the craving dropping off from our life. So the Buddha's victory is irreversible. And for us, there might be moments in our lives where we get a little bit of a taste of this, of the bubble-like nature of human life. Maybe we're on a retreat, or perhaps somebody close to us has died, and we see it for a moment, we really see what it's like. But then all too easily, we fall back into the old way of seeing things. But in the case of the Buddha, he can't go back. He's seen too much. He has to carry on in the nirvanic mode. So he's irreversibly moving in this endless stream. But the banishing of ignorance and craving is no easy thing. It's not a trick of the mind. It's not the work of a weekend or even a year. It's probably a lifelong commitment to actually really see that. Because it requires nothing less than the transformation of our whole lives. Rome wasn't built in a day. But we all have the possibility of gaining enlightenment. Anyone can gain enlightenment. That's the teaching of the Buddha. We have this opportunity to do that. It's been given to us. We have the teachings available to us. We can do that. We just need to simply keep going. Just taking little risks. Just go a little bit outside your comfort zone. Go a little bit deeper with your practice. See how that feels. Does it have the taste of freedom? The thing you've always got to ask yourself about Buddhist life and practice, does it have the taste of freedom? And if you would say, yes, it does, taste of freedom, then, you know, you can think, well, I'm on the right path. I'm on the right path. The freedom which doesn't fade away, just gets stronger and deeper and develops. It's ironic almost that we can develop a desire for enlightenment itself. It's called Dharma chanda, and it's the only kind of craving which is healthy, you could say, ultimately healthy. Yes, for this, a desire for this mysterious state we call enlightenment, which is beyond all our ordinary human understanding, and which the Buddha mysteriously called the deathless realm. So that's my talk. Thank you.